The Nuremberg trials were a series of 13 trials carried out in Nuremberg, Germany between 1945 and 1949 against defendants suspected of committing war crimes during World War II. The defendants, who included Nazi Party officials and high-ranking military officers and doctors, were indicted for charges such as crimes against peace and crimes against humanity. The Nuremberg trials served as a catalyst for the establishment of a permanent international court and provided precedent for evaluating later instances of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. We will provide an overview of the policies and events that encouraged and justified war crimes by members of the political, military, judicial, and economic leadership of Nazi Germany. Then we will discuss the major defendants prosecuted in the war tribunals. Finally, we will discuss the outcomes of the trial, including the post-war implementation of Nuremberg principles and the adoption of the Nuremberg Code. Racial discrimination against the Jewish population in Germany. Nazi Germany introduced laws restricting Jewish civil rights during the 1930s, including the Nuremberg race laws in 1935. Through these programs for the Aryanization of Germany, Jewish citizens would be excluded from their professions, lose their businesses, and would be forced to be segregated, making them second-class citizens. Nazi government legitimizing war crimes. Directive 21. Directive 21 was issued on December 18, 1940. Was a decree for Hitler's blueprint in the Eastern Front as a war of total annihilation towards its newly conquered people. Barbarossa Decree. The Barbarossa Decree was issued by Hitler on May 13, 1941. All attacks by the civilian population against the Wehrmacht are to be suppressed through extreme measures till the attackers are annihilated. Also, entitled Officers in the East to perform executions without trial. German soldiers who commit crimes against humanity in the Eastern Front are to be exempted from criminal responsibility. Commissar Order. In June of 1941, Hitler issued the Commissar Order. Political officers who were captured in battle were to be killed on the spot. As in this order, they are not given enemy combatant rights, since they are not recognized soldiers. SS Eisengruppen. The SS Eisengruppen were a special operations group of mobilized killing squads who followed behind Wehrmacht into occupied areas. Their job was to carry out mass murder against Jews in the Soviet Union. The Wehrmacht were complicit in these acts as well. In this Holocaust by bullets, an estimated 500,000 Jews died in 1941. The Eisengruppen most notoriously killed 33,000 Jews in 2 days in the Baba Yar ravine outside Kiev. Mass starvation. The Germans implemented policies for the mass starvation of Soviet people. This includes seizing food from Soviet citizens. The Germans also ordered the starving plan for Soviet POWs. The Germans also brutalized their Soviet prisoners, with cases of Soviet POWs being executed. Wannsee Conference. The Wannsee Conference drew up the final solution to the Jewish problem in Europe, transferring the mass murder of Jews from the Eisengruppen to the industrial mass murder of Jews at designated camps. Concentration camps. Concentration camps held Jews, Poles, Romani, and homosexuals. From 1933 to 1945, there were more than 40,000 camps throughout Nazi-occupied Europe. This includes 6 death camps. Human experiments, including Joseph Mengelé's twin experiment, low-temperature tests, and high-pressure tests, were all conducted at both POW and concentration camps. Deaths from Nazi policies. Up to 6 million Jews, 7 million Soviet citizens, 3 million Soviet POWs, and up to 220,000 Romani died from Nazi policies. Nuremberg Charter. On August 8, 1945, 2 days after the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, the 4 major Allied governments met in London, England, and signed the London Agreement. This legendary multilateral accord, commonly referred to as the Nuremberg Charter, established the International Military Tribunal that would oversee the prosecution and punishment of major war criminals of the European Axis powers. In addition to creating the tribunal, which was comprised of 1 judge from each of the 4 main Allied powers, the Nuremberg Charter provided that the tribunal had the authority to try and punish individuals who committed any of the following crimes. 1. Crimes against peace. Planning, preparing, initiating, or waging wars of aggression. 2. War crimes. Violations of customs of war, including murder or deportation of slave labor, murder of prisoners of war, the killing of hostages, and the wanton destruction of towns and cities whose devastation was not required by military necessity. 3. Crimes against humanity. Murder, extermination, enslavement, and deportation and other inhumane acts committed against civilian populations. And 4. Conspiracy, in the violation of crimes against peace, war crimes, or crimes against humanity. Nuremberg Trials. The Nuremberg Trials began on October 18, 1945, and the judgments on 22 of the most infamous Nazi leaders were handed down on September 30th and October 1st, 1946. All of these 22 defendants were indicted for the crimes as set forth in the Nuremberg Charter. Of the 22 principal defendants, 12 were sentenced to death. The most notorious of these war criminals included Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring, General Alfred Jodl, Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop, and Julius Streicher, the publisher of the anti-Semitic newspaper Der Stürmer. 6 defendants were sentenced to prison. The most famous criminals included Deputy Fuhrer Rudolf Hess, who was sentenced to life in prison, and Grand Admiral Karl Donitz, who was sentenced to 10 years in prison. 3 defendants were acquitted. The most famous of these was Albert Speer, Reich Minister of Armaments and War Production. Subsequent Nuremberg trials. On December 20th, 1945, the Allied Control Council issued Control Council Law No. 10. This proclamation authorized the 4 major Allied powers to suspect Nazi war criminals in their respective zones of occupation. In the U.S. occupied zone, which encompassed southern and southwestern Germany, U.S. military tribunals held 12 subsequent war crime trials between 1946 and 1949. The defendants in these proceedings included Nazi physicians, SS Eisengruppen commanders, Nazi judges, and industrialists. All defendants were indicted for the same crimes as previously charged in the original Nuremberg trials. In all, 183 defendants were indicted, resulting in 12 death sentences, 8 life sentences, and 77 terms of imprisonment. The remaining 86 defendants were acquitted. Nuremberg Principles. As a result of the Nuremberg trials, the International Law Commissions of the United Nations codified a set of guidelines known as the Nuremberg Principles, adopted and ratified by United Nations General Assembly Resolution 177 on November 21, 1947. The Nuremberg Principles established the creation of international criminal law and international human rights law as we know it today. The Nuremberg Principles provided 7 international guidelines that codified the legal principles underlying the Nuremberg trials against Nazi war criminals. These guidelines included, but are not limited to, provisions which state that A. Heads of state and responsible government officials are not relieved for crimes under international law. B. Persons acting under orders of their superiors are not relieved from criminal responsibility under international law, i.e. the Nuremberg defense. I was only following orders is not recognized affirmative defense under international law. C. Crimes punishable under international law include crimes against peace, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the conspiracy or complicity to commit any of these designated crimes. And D. Defendants charged with any crimes in violation of international law have due process, rights, in international tribunal proceedings. Nuremberg Code. On December 9, 1946, the U.S. Military Tribunal opened criminal proceedings against 23 leading Nazi physicians and administrations for their willing participation in war crimes and crimes against humanity. The defendants were charged with murder, torture, and other atrocities committed in the name of medical science. After 140 days of proceedings, with testimony from 85 witnesses and more than 1,500 documents entered into evidence, on August 20th, 1947, the U.S. Military Tribunal found 16 Nazi doctors guilty of crimes charged. 7 of those found guilty were sentenced to death. As a result, the doctors' trial, the U.S. War Council for War Crimes drafted and adopted the Nuremberg Code. With its 10 guiding principles, the Nuremberg Code significantly enhanced protections for human subjects who are participants in medical and scientific research projects. Some of the Nuremberg Code's leading principles include, but are not limited to, voluntary consent is required for all human subjects in medical and scientific experiments. Medical and scientific experiments using human subjects must be designed for the good of society. Medical and scientific experiments must be conducted in a manner so as to avoid all unnecessary physical and mental suffering. Human subjects in medical and scientific experiments have the right to bring their role in the experiment to an end at any time, and the medical doctor or researcher must terminate the experiment if he or she believes that the continuation of the experiment will cause death, disability, or injury to the experimental subject.